The darkness crept into the very fabric of dawn. In the far north, the horizon glowed with warming light, yet something stirred against its brightening promise. A hush fell over the land as distant howls resonated across the yawning sky. The people woke in dread, for these howls were not the common calls of winter wolves. Instead, they were the voices of the ancient beasts said to pursue the sun. Few had ever set eyes on them, but every elder around a hearth had told stories of the black-furred monsters, with jaws capable of snapping daylight in half. These nightmares, known as Skul and Svidr, had haunted legends for centuries. Some believed they were the first-born children of a banished deity, others that they emerged from the underworld to devour all hope. Whatever the truth, they were the Sun-Eaters, wolves of the Eclipse, harbingers of a darkness that would last forever unless they were stopped. On a high bluff overlooking a vast tundra, a woman named Ylva crouched beside a low rock, scanning the horizon. The land was silent, except for the moan of the wind. Her breath puffed out in ragged clouds as she watched for the faintest sign of movement. She had turned 18 winters just weeks before and bore a slender wooden spear strapped across her shoulders. Thick fur covered her from neck to shin, and she wore a carved talisman around her neck, a polished piece of moonstone shaped like a small wolf's fang. When she had received it from her grandmother upon coming of age, she learned the heirloom was meant for protection. But no protection lasted long when the Sun-Eaters prowled. From her vantage, the tundra seemed an unbroken sheet of ice. Dawn rays shimmered in the distance, yet Ylva felt no comfort from the gathering light. Deep in her bones, she sensed a threat drawn toward the sun's ascent. She had heard the terrifying legends all her life, how these wolves chased the sun each morning and threatened to swallow it in one monumental gulp. Tales said that if the wolves ever truly caught it, they would plunge the world into permanent night. An eclipse was no mere celestial coincidence. It was the wolves' jaws snapping shut, if only briefly to remind mortals of their power. Never had an eclipse lasted more than a few moments, but signs now hinted it could stretch long enough for the moon's shadow to combine with an ancient darkness. If that occurred, light itself might be lost forever. A brittle voice stirred behind Ylva. Her grandmother Aslaug shuffled forward. Silver hair fell down her back in braids, and her lined face bore the marks of decades spent in cruel and braving the northern winds. "They're on the move," the older woman said, her voice quavering like cracked ice. "We must warn the others." Ylva looked at her grandmother for a moment, then cast one final glance across the tundra. She saw no shapes among the drifts, but the weight in her soul assured her the wolves were there. She nodded to Aslaug, and together they descended the bluff's rocky face. This land was not kind to those who dared walk it unprepared. Sharp crags and hidden chasms waited under deceptive ridges of snow. One misstep and you could vanish into a crevice. But the two women moved with practiced skill, footprints crisp behind them. At the edge of their village, smoke trailed from huts fashioned of stones, peat, and wolfskin. Figures scrambled about, hurriedly gathering supplies and fastening dogs to sleds. The uneasy air told Ylva that the rumor had spread. Tomorrow's dawn was supposed to bring an eclipse, and the people feared the wolves might succeed this time. Most planned to flee south to avoid the brunt of the calamity, but a small band refused to abandon the north. Even if the end was coming, they intended to greet it on their land, in their homes, beneath the skies they had come to revere. Ylva and her grandmother made their way through the increasing commotion. A few families packed up in frantic haste, never pausing to say farewell to neighbors. Others forced a calm facade, as if refusing to show fear. Rafen, the village's chief huntsman, stood near a cluster of stones that served as a communal gathering place. His grey eyes flickered anxiously. He beckoned Ylva over, ignoring the shouts of those around him. "Sarah, they say the wolves will devour the sun tomorrow at daybreak," he began in a low voice. "Or at the very least, tear a piece out of it. If that happens, the light may weaken beyond saving." Aslaug, leaning on her staff, nodded. "In my youth, I saw an eclipse that cast our home in darkness for the span of a breath. The ravens cried, and the beasts howled, but the light returned. This time is different. The omens are stronger. We must try to intervene. Trough let out a weary sigh. We have but a handful of warriors. The others are either too old or have already fled with their families. How can we stand against creatures who chase the very sun? Might alone won't win, answered Auslorg. We must rely on knowledge once whispered from the old circle. There is a right to repel the wolves, to force them into hiding so the sun can slip away unscathed. But it has been many generations since anyone performed it. Ylva listened, her heart pounding. She had heard rumors of an ancient ritual, though rarely discussed plainly. It was said to involve the sacrifice of personal, lightsome, intangible gift that only a chosen individual could yield, yet the details were shrouded in secrecy, as though repeating them might hasten the doom they were meant to prevent. "How is it done?" Ylva asked, voice trembling despite her efforts to remain strong. "And by whom?" Aslaug's gaze softened but did not waver. "The rite must be performed by one whose spirit is bound to the moon," she replied, gesturing to Ylva's moonstone amulet. "Your mother wore that same talisman before you. She believed it capable of reflecting the light of the moon against any foe. You, child, have a bond with the lunar realm stronger than you know. You must undertake this task." Hroth frowned, uncertainty clouding his face. "You'd send her alone? Such a mission could devour her life." "It might," admitted the older woman, "but it must be done if we want to preserve our world. I'll come with her as far as I can. Yet only she can complete the rite. We need a guardian to watch from the village, as each step in the sequence requires cosmic alignment." The huntsman nodded grimly. "Then I will remain here. Muster the few who will fight. If the wolves set foot in the village, we'll delay them long enough for Ylva to do what must be done." Shortly after, Ylva gathered her belongings, the spear, the talisman, and a pouch of herbs and charms. She felt the weight of her fate pressing her with every breath. Yet resolve grew, lighting a fire in her chest. If there was a way to save her people from eternal night, she would do whatever it took. The path was uncertain, but it was hers alone to walk. Night settled in faster than usual, as though the sky itself sensed the looming eclipse and gave up the fight too soon. The moon rose, pale and fragile. Ylva slipped away from the village with her grandmother. They travelled across the glimmering snowfields, moonlight scattering in shards across the frozen surface. Neither spoke for a time. Their breath mingled in the cold air, trailing behind them. A single lantern guided their steps, but the pale glow of the moonstone at Ylva's throat seemed brighter than the flame. Before midnight, they reached a circle of standing stones, black against the horizon. According to ancient lore, this was where the moon goddess had once descended to gift mortals with her tears, each droplet forming a piece of moonstone. Ylva felt a strange pull, drawing her inside the circle. A hush fell heavier than before. Ice crunched underfoot, echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "Leave the lantern," Aslaug instructed. "The stones demand darkness, so the moon alone can guide us." Ylva set the lantern aside, letting her eyes adjust. The circle's centre was bare, though faint lines etched into the ground suggested that once there had been markings intricately carved. Aslaug placed a trembling hand on her granddaughter's shoulder and guided her toward the largest stone. Time and weather had shaped it into the rough form of a crouching wolf. Ylva could sense the ancient artistry that had crafted this shape into being. Removing a small knife from her belt, Aslaug took Ylva's hand. "Your blood must bind with the stone," she said softly. "Only then can the space open for the rite." Though fear coiled in her stomach, Ylva nodded. When the blade's edge pricked her fingertip, she let a few drops of blood fall upon the stone's surface. The moonstone at her chest flared once, then settled into a steady glow. A rumbling vibration passed through the earth. Ylva shuddered as though an invisible presence acknowledged her offering. The circle of standing stones shimmered for a moment, then fell still, silent as before. Aslaug closed her eyes, reciting words in a whisper only the ice-tinged wind could decipher. Her wrinkled hands traced ancient runes in the air. Ylva felt a rush of warmth flood her senses, though the ambient temperature remained frigid. A faint glimmer of greenish light danced around them, reminiscent of the auroras that sometimes graced the sky. It swirled along the edges of the circle, forming a protective barrier. "It has begun," Aslaug said, letting out a shaking breath. "At dawn, you must be at the highest ridge, facing the eastern horizon. Hold the talisman aloft when the wolves draw near. If you can channel the moon's power in that moment, it may force them back." A distant howl broke the hush. It started as a single, mournful note, but was soon joined by another, then a third, weaving together in a terrifying harmony. Ylva's heart pounded. She felt the call in her own bones, a bone-deep resonance that rattled her soul. The wolves were awake. They knew dawn approached. They sensed the threshold that would become an eclipse. Their appetite for sunlight grew keener with each minute. She and Aslaug did not linger near the standing stones. They built a small shelter of firs at the base of a rocky slope. Throughout the night, Ylva slept fitfully, dreaming of monstrous jaws snapping at a blazing orb, swallowing it whole, plunging her dreamscape into black that weighed heavy as lead. She dreamed that the wolves turned their luminous eyes on her, scorching her with malevolent hunger. Just before dawn, Aslaug roused her. Together they trekked toward the ridge. The sky glowed in the east, but an unsettling darkness flickered at its edges, as if a shadow lay in wait, poised to overtake the sun's ascent. Ylva felt the blood thunder in her ears. She clutched her spear in one hand, talisman in the other. With each step, she seemed to inch closer to a cosmic battle. The wind felt colder, the light less certain. Even the birds that usually greeted dawn were silent. They reached the crest of the ridge. Far below, the village huddled in the gloom, some dwellings lit with fires. The snowfields stretched out in all directions. From this height, the rising sun would soon appear. Ylva's gaze flickered across the view. The sky's pale glow was now partially veiled by a dark, disk-like shadow that gnawed at the edge of the sun. As the two celestial bodies aligned, the temperature dropped sharply. A hush, long and dreadful, covered the land. Then came the howls, closer than ever. A pair of immense silhouettes materialized over a distant snowbank, bounding with eerie speed. Ylva's breath caught in her throat. The wolves were monstrous beyond measure, each as large as a bear, their fur black as coal, their eyes burned gold, reflecting the weakening sunlight. Teeth glinted white and sharp. Charging toward the ridge, they gave the impression of unstoppable forces of nature. Aslaug gripped Ylva's shoulder. "Steady," she whispered. "Remember the rite. Focus on your connection to the moon." Ylva raised the moonstone talisman as the sun's halo grew more obscured. A stark, uncanny darkness began to spread across the sky, stealing color from the world. As the wolves lunged forward, their howls became roars, merging with the roar of the wind. Everything trembled. Ylva's heart, the snowy ledge beneath her feet, even the sky seemed to quake with fear. One of the wolves sprang for the sun, jaws parted. Though it was impossible to truly reach the celestial body, the beast snapped at the orb in a symbolic attack, and the shadow advanced across the sun's face. Light continued to vanish, as though gulped down by the monstrous mouth. In that eerie twilight, Ylva felt an immense dread, a sense of the world stumbling toward everlasting darkness. With trembling arms, she lifted the talisman overhead. Its faint light paled in comparison to the cosmic spectacle unfolding above. But she recalled her grandmother's words. This bond with the moon was older than any mortal memory. The moon was a guardian of the night, a sentinel that balanced the day's brightness. If she could summon that protective essence, perhaps it would keep the wolves from devouring the daylight entirely. Concentrating, she closed her eyes and held the talisman steady. She pictured the moon's soft luminescence, how it had guided her ancestors, how it had governed tides and seasons under the midnight sky. She remembered the standing stones, the circle's pulsing energy. She recalled the sting of the blade on her finger, a drop of blood forging a covenant with forces beyond mortal understanding. She whispered a chant passed down by her grandmother, words that resonated like starlight in her mind. A low growl broke her concentration. Skolag, the larger of the two wolves, prowled closer. Its massive paws crunched the snow just yards away. A Skolag stood between Yola and the beast, spear in hand, old eyes determined. Despite her age, she had lived a life of survival in these harsh lands. She was no stranger to the hunt, nor to being hunted. "For the sun!" she cried, thrusting her spear at the wolf. It collided with the animal's shoulder, causing the creature to recoil, but Skul barely seemed wounded. Snarling, it snapped its jaws at Aslaug, forcing her to retreat a few steps. Meanwhile, the other wolf, Sviedra, leapt to the side, its gaze locked on Yelva. She could feel the beast's hunger, an otherworldly need to devour light itself. The edges of the eclipse glowed with dying splendor overhead, a ring of fire in the sky. Darkness rolled across the land, nearly complete. In that instant, something flared within Yelva. The moonstone around her neck grew hot. She opened her eyes, and a faint silver radiance enveloped her entire form. Svidra howled, squinting against this unexpected glow. Half blinded by the swirling aura of moonlight, Vilva raised the talisman again, tears streaming, uncertain if the magic would hold. Yet she would not falter. She thought of her mother, of every ancestor who had worn the same amulet. She thought of her village and all the people cowering in the dim twilight, desperate for the day not to vanish forever. The silver light expanded, weaving intricate patterns in the air. It gathered around Svidru, forming a barrier. The beast snarled, snapping its jaws at the intangible shield that separated it from Ilva. She winced as each bite fell perilously close, but the barrier persisted. Skull howled and whipped around, abandoning its tussle with Aslaug to aid its sibling. Together, the two monstrous wolves lurched at the shimmering field of moonlight. Ilva felt her legs trembling. The energy coursing through her body was nearly overwhelming. Her breath came in ragged gulps, and she could sense that each concentrated effort drained her life force. The wolves battered the moonlit barrier with ferocious intent, jaws scraping arcs of silver that shattered into sparks. Overhead, the eclipse hung at its darkest point, the sun almost entirely consumed by shadow. She glimpsed Aslaug, who had collapsed onto one knee, weapon fallen at her side, struggling to regain her breath. The older woman's lips quivered in silent prayer. The day balanced on a knife's edge. One misstep and darkness would conquer. "Drive them back," Aslaug gasped. "Push them away from the sun." Summoning every ounce of courage, Yelva focused on the amulet, calling upon the infusion of moonlight to grow even stronger. She envisioned the Mother Moon protecting her child, overshadowing the ravenous darkness that threatened to devour the world's light. She chanted ancient words, each syllable building upon the last, braided together in luminous power. The moon's radiance burst from the talisman, forming shimmering tendrils that lashed the two wolves, who yelped in shock. The ring of silver light expanded outward like a wave. Skala and Svidra staggered, struggling to remain upright under its force. Their growls turned to yowls of protest. The wave of moonlight swept them further and further from the ridge, pushing them across the tundra. For a moment, it seemed certain that the beast's hold on the sun was loosening. A glimmer of light appeared at the edge of the eclipse. But the wolves did not yield so easily. With a synchronized snap of their jaws, they lunged forward. Their combined strength battered against Yelva's moonlit aura. She could feel the recoil in her chest like a hammer blow. Her knees buckled, and she nearly dropped the talisman. The memory of the standing stones flickered in her mind. She convinced herself that she was not alone, that centuries of protectors stood with her. The moon was her ally. She let out a feral cry. channeling the last of her energy into one final surge. The silver wave ballooned overhead, splashing across the dark sky. A portion of that moonlit energy struck the eclipse itself, tearing at the shadow that obscured the sun. As if in slow motion, the black disk began to recede. The ring of solar fire expanded, letting rays of gold and pink spear through the gloom. It was a surreal sight. Both wolves twisted in pain, pinned by the unstoppable brilliance returning to the heavens. Skul let out one last plaintive howl, streaming echoes of fury across the sky. Svid rejoined with a chilling cry that vibrated in the very air. Then, swept away by the intangible sea of light, the beasts skidded across the snowy plains. In the distance, their huge shapes stumbled and staggered. The eclipse ring parted. Dawn brightness flooded the land. The spell that locked them to the sun's lifeblood dissolved, forcing the wolves to retreat into some hidden realm. Then silence. Ylva collapsed, her vision dimmed, as if she were slipping into a personal eclipse of her own. Breathing was hard. The last thing she registered was Aslak's voice calling her name, and the warm glow of sunlight spreading across the ridge. When Ylva awakened, she was lying in a hardened tent of furs inside the village. The morning sun shone through a gap in the covering. Her body ached, though joy flickered in her heart. She had not expected to survive. She tried to sit up, and a gentle hand touched her shoulder. She turned to see Aslaug crouched nearby, a weary but relieved expression on her face. "You succeeded," her grandmother murmured. "The wolves were driven back. The sun is still ours." Tears brimmed in Ylva's eyes. She looked down and saw the moonstone amulet, now dull in color, but intact. "I felt like I was about to break," she whispered. "I thought the wolves would devour me as well." "I feared so too," Aslaug admitted. "But in the end, the moon's bond protected you. That and your own will." Outside, villagers huddled around cookfires, their faces a mix of relief and awe. Hrath led a group who had stood guard during the eclipse. They had seen two great shadows flung from the sun's path by brilliant silver light. Children exclaimed excitedly that Ylva had forced the sun-eaters into retreat. Some claimed they had spotted Scale and Svidru howling in frustration before disappearing into the frosted forest. Others said they had vanished in a beam of starlight. Regardless, the incipient gloom had lifted. In the days that followed, the village gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. People resumed their lives, hunting, preparing for the next onslaught of cold. Yet an undercurrent of reverence remained. Ylva was no longer just a hunter's daughter, she had become a legend in her own right. Some whispered that she should travel the land, teaching others the rites that had saved the sun. Others speculated on whether the wolves would return with each eclipse, forcing Ylva to fight forever. Yet the simple truth stood. She had tasted the raw power of cosmic forces, confronted them, and lived to see the light of a new dawn. The winter snow eventually thawed into patches of icy mud, revealing the earth beneath. The days lengthened and the nights grew shorter. But the memory of that near-perpetual darkness never quite left the people's minds. Each night, before sleep, they would glance at the moon, recalling how it had joined forces with one brave soul to repel the hungry jaws of shadow. Even as seasons shifted and storms came and went, hope burned as steadily as the hearth fires. They knew the wolves might try again, for their hunger was eternal. Yet they also knew that as long as there were guardians who believed in the union of moon and sun, dawn would not be so easily devoured. Late one evening, Ylva found herself once more at the circle of standing stones. She ran her finger over the stone that bore her dried blood. The sky was brilliant with stars, the moon a luminous crescent before her. The black shapes of the stones stood watch. She spoke softly, so that only the night air and the ancient powers could hear. "Thank you for guiding me. If ever the wolves come again, I will be ready." As if in acceptance, a faint glow flickered over the runic markings on the largest stone. Ylva lingered in the silence, letting peace settle in her heart. Even the mightiest beasts of legend could not swallow the sun so long as defenders stood resolute. If the wolves returned, they would find her waiting, spear in hand, moonstone ablaze around her neck, for darkness would always rise, but so too would dawn, and the courage in a single soul could kindle enough light to hold it back.